Well, I was named after my dad, except his name wasn't Tony. Or I would email people to introduce myself, and then it wasn't until I spoke to them on the phone or met them, and they would say, "Oh, we thought you were going to be a man." I'm like, well,
Yeah. Toni Kent is a professional speaker, compare, and stand-up with a specific focus on social mobility. Using her own journey as a rich seam of material and humour as a means to diffuse what can be a tricky topic, Toni's performed for audiences that range from corporate insurers and tech firms to local hospices and hundreds of Women's Institute members. In today's episode, Toni and I discuss how her name was chosen, her funny experiences with having a confusing first name, having to learn her husband's friends' actual names and their nicknames, and identity associated with being a parent. Names enriched with meaning are part of one's identity and hold such importance. Welcome to That's My Name. I'm Maya Mitsko September Walford. What's your name? How was your name chosen?
Well, I was named after my dad, except his name wasn't Tony. So this is a constant source of confusion to me. So my dad's name he's James Joseph Daly.
Mm-hmm.
However, lots of people called him Tony.
Okay.
And I think the story behind it is, so he's from an Irish family, and often you are given a confirmation name. So his family were Irish Catholic, and possibly he was given that as a confirmation name, but his family, they're a bit of a mystery to me, very mysterious family. So there was a group of people that called him Tony, there were a group of people that called him Jim, a group of people called him James, and I think my parents had decided that their first child would be named after him. So my middle name is Justine, and as I have been told it, if I were a boy, I would have been called Tony Justin. So
oh wow, okay. So they've
unisex name.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. It's really funny that I've written down his name, James Joseph Daly, and there's no Tony in there. But yeah, it's interesting that it's the confirmation name. But did you see, like, I guess with any kind of birth or death or certificates or any kind of marriage certificates, is Tony anywhere, like his name, well, Tony that he was known by, is that on any kind of official documents? Do you know?
No. So I don't know. I think it was just something. Yeah, he was called, and he then became an atheist. So there is no record that I have or the family has of his confirmation, and I don't fully know how that kind of works, how that's documented. So the explanation kind of that was sort of given to me was that it was probably from his confirmation, but lots of people knew him as Tony, and so I was Tony. Which you think it's quite funny when if you do one of those icebreaker sessions, and you say I was named after my dad. But so that's how it came about, and I would have been Tony whether I were a boy or a girl.
That's really, really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Do you so I know we've had a bit of a chat before, and I've also read your article that you posted quite recently again on LinkedIn. So can you tell us a bit about any funny experiences you've had with your name? And I know you've called your name or described your name as a confusing name. Have you got any kind of interesting or funny stories around that?
So it's been a constant source of confusion for lots of people. So I was born in 1975, and at the time, people were not, you didn't tiptoe around things. So if I was asked my name, they say, well, that's a boy's name, isn't it? And I said, well, they said, well, what's it short for? So firstly, people couldn't accept that I was a girl called Toni. That was one issue. And I went to a Christmas party when I was 5, at the local Labour club. So Father Christmas comes, he's got presents for all the children. So he's been given a list of names. And I got this fire engine, and I was so upset because I really wanted a Cindy. And I remember that crying. My brother was laughing hysterically. I mean, he's called Austin. So that, you know, there was, firstly, it was, your name is a boy's name, and then what sort of a name is Austin? I think my parents were just determined to kind of buck the trend.
Be unique.
So and then I remember going to the cinema when I was about 10, and being an old-fashioned cinema back in the day. All the kids used to go unaccompanied, throw sweets at people, and the usherette came up with her torch, and she's shining the torch, like, find out who is doing this. And she confiscated my sweets, and she went, "What's your name?" And I said, "My name's Toni." And she went, "Right, you can get these back after the film." And then when I went to collect them, they went, "This boy wants his sweets back." And I was like, "I'm not a boy." And I did have short hair, so there was that. Whenever I know, it's a nightmare. Whenever I've done anything official, so mortgage documents, applying for a passport, getting a new job, the question is that your real name? I'm like, yes, that's my actual name. And then they question it. So, you know, when you say to somebody, "This is my name," and I say, "Yes, I accept that is your name. However, it must be Antoinette, surely, or Antonia." I'm like, "No, it's just Toni." So I can't apply for anything. I was mistaken for a boy in my childhood. When I met my husband, when I was going out with him, and his parents would say to their friends, "Oh, but, you know, Ben's, you know, met Toni," and they would tell them, they would have to specify that he had met a woman, because people would be like, "Oh, wow, okay, you know, we didn't know your son was gay," and they're like, "No, he's met a girl called Toni." So there's that. I mean, it's just constant, Maya. And this has been really, I've quite enjoyed this, because I think I have had a bit of a maybe a bit of a benefit in one of the jobs I had. So I worked for Microsoft, and we used to work, you know, across Europe, cross company things going on, and all the Italians thought I was a man because it's an Italian spelling for a male name. Or I would email people to introduce myself, and then it wasn't until I spoke to them on the phone or met them, and they would say, "Oh, we thought you were going to be a man." I'm like, "Well, are you disappointed? I don't know." So, but I do think in some instances it actually gave me a kind of advantage, because hate to say it, but certainly when I was early in career working in tech companies, 23-year-old men were viewed as potentially having a bit more to offer than a 23-year-old woman. Times have changed, though, I like to think. I hope.
Well, I like to think that. I do think that, you know, there's a lot of bias, that whether we're aware or unaware of it, I think bias does play a big role. And as I've explored in some of my other episodes, some aren't out yet, but they will be released over the coming weeks. I have explored a lot around kind of names and applying for jobs, and that sort of thing. So I do think a bias does kind of continue to exist around names, which is a shame, but it's something that's important to be aware of. I think, you know, if we're aware of it, we can kind of consciously or actively try and combat those biases that all of us possess, in some way or another. But thanks for sharing those stories and experiences. They're hilarious. I was definitely laughing away as you were telling some of them. Really, really funny. And it is interesting how kind of confusion around your name has been quite a constant in your life, kind of throughout your childhood and now kind of into your adult life as well. It's it must be quite amusing for you, and maybe a bit tiring.
It's do you know what, though? I never ever wanted to have a different name. And I know people have changed their first names. Actually, one guy that I hired, I announced his appointment to the team, And then he said to me, "Oh, no, I prefer to be called by my middle name." But
Oh,
he'd put
okay.
his full name was on his CV, but he didn't like his first name and he wanted to be called by his middle name. It was like,
Oh,
oh, right, okay. So yeah, I was like, I wish I'd known that before.
yeah.
Yeah, so I never wanted to change my name, and I do think actually there is part of me that has enjoyed
Yeah.
the playfulness that comes with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Mm.
Definitely. So let's move on now to kind of marriage, and because you've mentioned you're married. Did
Mm.
you say your husband's David?
No, he's called Ben.
Ben, sorry.
That's
I'm
okay. I don't
I
know,
didn't note
maybe.
it down. I don't know where
Okay.
that came from.
I'm sure, I hope I haven't called him that.
I'll listen back and I'll double check. But no. So yeah, you got married to Ben,
Yeah,
and you have changed your surname. So I know that your maiden name was, and I did note this one down, Daly.
yeah,
And you've changed your surname to Kent.
yeah.
So did you ever kind of consider not changing it? Or was there much thought kind of around changing your name, taking on his surname? Tell me
Yeah,
about
I
that.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a lot of thought went into it actually.
Okay.
So my dad was Daly, and he was like the last. So his sister had died when he was a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and he was kind of like the last male Daly in his
Yeah.
line. And then my dad died when I was a teenager, and there was part of me that thought I wanted to hold on to that name. Now I've got four brothers and a
Okay.
sister, so it's not like the name would kind of die out, but there was something for me that was wanting to hold on to him and to that.
Yeah.
And as a name, it's got a nice Tony Daly. People say,
Yeah.
"Yay, Tony Daly! It's fun! Yay, fun!" Um, and I spoke to Ben before we got married, and I said, "Oh, I'm thinking about either keeping my maiden name or hyphenating, but Tony Daly
Mm.
Kent does not have the right ring to it, I don't think.
Yeah.
Um, Tony Kent Daly sounds okay, but then to put his name before I mean, this is just, then you get yourself tied up in knots.
Yeah.
So it was something that I thought about for a long time. And then I think I thought, oh God, it's just, easier
Mm.
to take my husband's surname. And one of my friends said to me, she was like, "Oh, you've really grown up, Tony." I was like, "Oh, right, have I?" She said, "Yes, because you've gone from being Tony Daly to I'm Toni Kent." So now I have a newsreader's name.
Yeah.
So thank you, I'm Toni Kent. Um, so it has got a different gravity to it as a
Yeah.
name. And so I did like becoming a Mrs. I think for me it
Mm.
was quite novel and it was something that I wanted. Um, what is challenging today is where the world has changed. Society is different now. You
Mm.
get situations where, let's say I'm talking to a teacher, like a teacher at one of my kids' schools,
Mm.
and they'll say, "Hello, Mrs. Kent." And I'm like, no, 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 please call me Tony. But
Yeah.
then they may insist on being called Ms. or Mr. or Miss.
Mm.
And you kind of think, look, you know, let's just call each other by our first names,
Yeah.
because all this kind of forced formality feels really incongruous when you're trying to have a human
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I like my surname. I like that we all have the same surname. But then I loved what I heard on your podcast with Ilda, where she said in Mexico, you just add the extra surname on the end. And I
Mm.
thought, wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
life be easier if we just did that?
Yeah. Yeah. Keeping
Much
both.
easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that your maiden name, surname, maiden name, um, is Irish. So do you
Yeah.
know kind of where that name kind of any history behind Daly. And I do know Tom Daly, and I know it's spelled differently.
Yes.
Yeah, do you know kind of any history behind Daly?
I don't know that much. My dad's family were from the sort of Limerick area.
Mm-hmm.
However, now this was my, grandmother's married name, and she was married 3 times, and
Okay.
she outlived all her husbands and both her
Oh
kids. And you're
wow.
like, what have you been doing?
Wow. Yeah.
So she married a Scotsman who was a Maron. She married a Walsh, he was Irish, and a
Mm-hmm.
Daly, who was Irish, and her family were also Irish. And I think where you were saying actually about the spelling, this was something that did get a lot easier when I took my married name, because
Mm-hmm.
nobody could spell either. My first name would be spelled Tony when
Mm.
it's Toni, and then my surname it was Daly,
Yeah.
and people put E's in it, I's in it, and they say, "Are you sure it's spelt like that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm like." So, so I went from having two names that were always misspelt to just having one misspelt name. Um, but yeah, and I think the Irish thing to me is interesting because I had these great aunts, like great auntie Mamie and
Mm.
Uncle Cornelius, and there were some really interesting names there that,
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
flipping out, Mamie never got spelt correctly. So I
Mm.
think, God, they had coming to, England from Ireland. It was like it just moved to
Yeah.
a place where nobody spells your name right.
Yeah. So I read in your article that you posted on LinkedIn that you had to kind of learn when you met your husband, you had to learn his friends' names
Mm,
as well as their nicknames.
yeah,
And you've kind of observed that men seem more playful when it comes to nicknaming.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, let's chat about that. What have you had any kind of funny or interesting experiences? Has there been any kind of particularly interesting names?
Yeah, and I've been sort of chewing it over quite a bit actually. So my observation is this: like there's the standard, we're going to add a Y to your surname.
Mm,
So there's
mhm.
Broomy and Studdy, and well, my son has been called Kenty, so it's a
Okay.
thing. They add a
Yeah.
Y to the end. There's that. Um, then there is actually there's one. Sometimes they get really playful. So one of my friends' his surname is Bunch, and he
Mhm.
gets called Bunchy, right? Out of Y. He gets called Bunchos, Bunchalinos, Bunchalini. So you just see how far they can take it. So you got that
Yeah.
you get it. It relates to the name.
Yeah.
Um, then there's the guy that introduced actually Ben and I. His nickname is Queenie.
Okay.
They've got a friend called Shed. Nobody remembers where that came from, so
Shed.
he just gets called Shed. Um,
What's his
and
actual name?
Julian.
What?
I know. I mean, it's just a quick hop and a step, isn't it, from Julian to
Yeah,
Shed? Yeah.
exactly.
So and there was something about that I absolutely, I loved it because it was a real, I guess, a camaraderie thing. A lot of them played
Mm,
cricket together or football. There was a guy who we met through a different group of friends, and he's called Kenner. That's his name. Everyone calls him Kenner.
mm,
That is his
mm.
name. And then there was a group email being sent round back in the day before WhatsApp. And I remember saying to Ben, "Who's this Tim?" He went,
Yeah.
"It's Kenner." I was like, "All right,
What?
okay." And because his surname is Mackenzie Smith, so
Yeah.
Mackenzie becomes Kenner. So I think that to me kind of signal a bonding
Mm,
friendship, and certainly amongst my friends. So I've been called Tony Girl. So there was a friend of mine who had a boyfriend called Tony, and if I
yeah.
phoned her mum would say, "It's Tony Girl" on the phone. Um, my other friend called me Tony Bird,
Okay.
um, and then she just calls me Bird now,
Oh.
which is nice. And I might get called Tone,
Mm,
um, or then it became Bonus at one point. Um, but mostly with my girlfriends, it is a shortening. So Donna is Don.
mm, mhm, mhm.
There isn't that mucking about with people's surnames or
Yeah.
nicknames that seems to happen with the boys that I know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm kind of thinking to my friendship groups as well, and I think, I can definitely resonate with that. So like with my best friend Maddie, her name's actually Madeline,
Yeah,
but then it's Maddie, but I just call her Mads. So I've really
yeah,
shortened it. But
yeah,
I wouldn't call her by her surname. But I know that there's kind of guys in our friendship, a wider friendship group, and it's the surname. So yeah, interesting. It is interesting.
yeah. And actually, my husband used to get called Bish, and
Okay.
he was a very good, I think, very good wicket keeper. And the joke
Mm.
was that my husband was not that good a wicket keeper. So
Oh.
so it would be like, we're going to name you after someone that really excels in this
Yeah.
sport by virtue of the fact that you had one great catch once. So,
Yeah.
and these things kind of stick around, and I
Yeah.
guess you have to know these because sometimes one of his friends would refer to him as that, and I would have to make sure to join in, you have to know.
Yeah. Understand the
um
backstory to it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that is funny. Um,
Mm,
and then I know that you have children. And
yes.
I was reflecting on this and also after reading your article, I think, when you have children, I don't have any myself yet. But it is kind of like a new identity in it, and you do get a new name, whether that be mum, mummy,
Mm,
or whatever it might be. It is, you're given a new name.
yeah.
And I think it very much links to a new identity or a new element to your identity.
Mm.
So how does that feel? How did that feel?
Um, well, I mean, lovely becoming a parent. Although
Mm,
I had not wanted children for a very long time. So I come from a
mm,
big family and thought that's hard work.
yeah.
But then I turned 30 and so I immediately want to have children. Um, and there's one thing about it is I made a really, really conscious effort when I met other parents. Um, like I didn't want to be, oh, there's Bee's mummy. I was like,
Mm,
no, actually, I'm Toni. And I made a really conscious effort to get to know the other parents and what they did and what they
mm,
enjoyed. And I would say to my kids, I was like, you see, Barbara, I'll say her name and then I'll make her listen. Then she'll feel all coy. But so there's a woman I know, and she is a doctor, so scientific doctor. She's also
mm,
a qualified accountant, and it makes me angry that people would say, "Oh, that's just so and so's mummy." And I think,
mhm.
no, 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 no. That person is a scientist. That person is a housing officer. That person, paints. That person raises their children, but they're
Mm,
just to find out, oh, that's so and so's mummy. And so I really did make a special effort to find out what it was that these people were really about, rather than
mm,
rather than how they are framed as a parent.
mhm.
But that whole, yeah, I say that when you get your checkup from the midwife, when they come and visit you at home,
Yeah.
they secretly install sensors on your toilet seat, so that the minute, like, second you sit down, the kid's like, mummy, 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 mummy. And and I feel it now. You get that sinking feeling sometimes. So my kids
No.
15 and 12,
Yeah.
and mum, and it's going to be, where is my mum? Where's my
Yeah.
lanyard? Where's my lunchbox? Where's this? And I just like shout at them, go,
Yeah.
I don't know, and I don't care. Um, and I do think it can be something that is, you're desperate for your babies to say mama or dada.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
but it's wearing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you think, no, 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 hang on a minute, I need to. And this is why I think it's so important to find time to do the things that sort of, really make you feel like yourself.
Mm, yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny you say that because I am 25 and I saw my mum this weekend and
Mm.
I still I think sometimes I am like, Mom,
Mm.
So just to warn you, I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon.
Oh no, it's never going away.
No,
Oh.
but that is that is it's interesting, and I really like that you made quite a mindful effort to get to know other parents' names rather than just being known as kind of whoever's mum or whoever's dad. I think that's really, really important. It makes me
Yeah.
reflect to one of my goddaughters. She has a neighbour called Arlo who she plays
Mm.
with, and she's when she sees his mum, she's like, "Hi, Arlo's mum." I'm like, but
Ah,
can you just say hello, her name instead of hi, Arlo's mum?
yeah,
She has a name. So
yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting. She's not just speak referring to her kind of to me as someone's mum, but actually that's what she knows her as, and that's how she addresses her, which is quite interesting. So I will definitely work on changing that a
It's
bit more
really
actively.
interesting. And actually I do have I tried this out, but my dad wasn't having any of it.
Mm,
I went through a period when I was quite young where my mum said, "Oh, you can call me by my first name." So I was like,
mm,
"Hi, Julie," and I
mm,
remember it was always quite taboo, like to call your parents by their first name.
yeah,
And
yeah,
my
yeah,
dad said, "Absolutely not." He's like,
yeah,
"You're
yeah,
not
yeah,
calling me that."
yeah,
Um, but I know friends whose um, kids call them by their first
yeah,
name, and that really
yeah,
works for their household. And
yeah,
I think it is interesting to think about, well, does that subtly change things in some
mm,
way? Really, I find it
mm,
really interesting to sort of think about. Um,
yeah, like
yeah,
the
yeah,
dynamics
yeah.
of um, yeah, because I think names or labels have such kind of can bring kind of connotations with them. So it's
Mm.
whether your mum or your name that you were given at birth, I think they can
Oh,
invoke different feelings.
and you prompted a thought in me there because I went
Mm,
to look it up because I knew we were
mm,
speaking. So
mm,
I was thinking about how you call your child many, many things. And
mm,
before we name it, okay, so there's a couple of threads here. So one is that when we were having children, when I was
mm,
pregnant, I was talking to a friend about names, and she said, well, you want to give your child a name. So this is a bit old school, but that would sound right um,
mm.
at the board table at the Bank of England. And this
Oh
is,
wow.
people do think about
Yeah,
this. And it is really interesting. So we thought a lot about
yeah.
what we called our children, but we thought about, how might it be abbreviated? What
Mm,
else
mhm,
might they get called? So our son is William, so he could be
mm,
Liam, Billy, Will, Wills,
mm.
Willie, Bill. He could be like, dozens
Yeah,
of things. Um, and we do call them like pet names and affectionate
yeah,
names, and
yeah.
sometimes I get called Mother Duck. I quite like that. But there was a saying, and apparently I think it's said in lots of different cultures, but I looked it up. So
Mm,
someone had said in Sweden they have a saying that literally translated means a dear child has many names. And
mm.
I just love that. So we call the
Yeah,
kids all sorts, and I think I also heard it expressed as a child with many names is very loved.
yeah,
And so, yeah, there are the nicknames that you can't say in front of your children's friends, of course, because that would be
yeah,
embarrassing.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think using lots of different pet names is a sign of affection.
Definitely, definitely. And I think it kind of signifies that bond as well. Sometimes,
Mm,
there can be that special bond that only, your dad calls you, or only your mum calls you, or only your sibling calls you. So I think it creates that kind of special connection and bond, and also that understanding, because sometimes a name might be attached to a kind of backstory, like we've touched on earlier.
yeah.
But it creates that kind of bond and maybe a deeper level of understanding as well.
Mm,
So yeah, I know I agree with that, and I really, really like that.
mm, yeah.
Yeah. So what are you up to at the moment, Toni, apart from obviously being on this podcast?
Yeah, wow, my week is complete. So there's a couple of things I'm doing. I've got a number of stand-up sessions that I'm doing for some organisations, including KPMG,
Nice.
working on some stuff with PwC. So yeah, that's really focusing on telling my social mobility story and using humour to do that. So I'm doing a lot of that kind of work. And I've got some Women's Institute groups that I'm booked in to perform for, so that'll be really fun.
Nice.
Yeah, there's a couple of events that I'm comparing. So for a law firm or a collection of law firms have asked me to compare their conference. So I'm getting back to doing stuff face to face. There's still a lot of remote online performing in there, but I'm doing a lot face to face, which I will be, which I'm really, really excited about.
Yeah, I guess it's whole different. You can really feel the energy of the audience, I think, when it's in person. And I think get that instant kind of feedback as well. I think sometimes when you're behind a screen, you don't know whether people are kind of engaged or laughing or in agreement. So yeah, I'm happy to hear that you're going to do more and more live sessions.
Yeah. That's
cool. And how can people connect with you?
You can find me. Oh, I'm everywhere. No, I'm on LinkedIn at Toni J Kent, Twitter, Facebook. So I'm really happy to connect on any of those platforms, really. Or you can go to tonikent.co.uk and you'll see the things that I'm writing, and you can get some clips of my performances on there.
Brilliant. And yeah, what I would say is I've seen one of Toni's stand-ups before. Really, really enjoyed it. Could really kind of resonate and relate to elements of her story. So yeah, I definitely recommend anyone listening to do check out Toni and try and attend one of her stand-ups, whether that's in person or online as well. Really, really good. Thank you, Toni, so much for today. I've definitely laughed a lot, which is great, and really, really enjoyed chatting with you.
Lovely. Thanks, Maya. Great to talk to you too. Thanks for having me. Thank you.